by two Marauder McTow.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm very conflicted. I have all the feelings. How about you?
I'm feeling the same, actually. Yes, we are talking about Kevin Costner is returning to the show, and I might be defending him. I don't know, but we're going to be talking about The Postman from 1997. However, I am going to say just a quick run through the plot. Not the whole thing, because it's basically sort of like a nameless drifter dons a postman's uniform and bag of mail as he begins a quest to inspire hope to the survivors living in post-apocalyptic America. That's one take. The other take is, following the post-apocalypse, people are living in disarray in small units as they try to survive against a plague, and an individual sort of starts to rise up against an army that is built around strength and intimidation of little settlements and taking from them, and is built around a single leader called General Bethlehem. And in response to that, other normal people sort of rise up. This basically is, I think, seasons sort of like 6 and 7 of Walking Dead.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
I was halfway through. I was like, "Oh, I am Negan." That's what we're getting with this. So, it was kind of bizarre to see that. What are your initial thoughts? I mean, Julian, what are your initial thoughts then on The Postman?
Well, I'm very conflicted. I mean, I feel like in some ways, sort of similar to Waterworld, I sort of feel like there is an ambitious, good idea in this. I think in some ways this is closer to realization than that. And I think that, I mean, obviously this is based on a David Brin novel. The core ideas here are sound. In the execution, though, it oscillates from, good scenes and, scenes where I think, oh, that was surprisingly solid. And then the very next scene or next line of dialogue, I'll think, that is misjudged. That is just not working. And, and it's amazing how much it kind of oscillates between the two for me.
Yeah.
There's stuff I like. I mean, this is close to a good movie, but it's not. But then there's other stuff that is just groan-worthy and mind-bending in terms of its choices. So that's my sort of initial take. What about you?
No, it's just similar in that I had to think like overall. So I think the conclusion I kind of reach. We'll get to sort of final decisions at the very end, but generally I was like, this film is saccharine, self-indulgent on the part of Kevin Costner, and kind of dumb. But overall, I enjoyed it. And that's where I sort of ended up going, okay. But like you say, it's that thing of going, I can see that this could have been something really special, but kind of misses the mark repeatedly. Like like you said, there are scenes that are really good individually, and then other bits where like even I'm sort of going, well, this is kind of head scratching. I'm not sure what this is supposed to be or like what they're aiming for here. So yeah, it's
I think you might have enjoyed it more than I did. I don't know how much I enjoyed. I think that there are parts where I think that's a good idea, or I think that's a solid performance. I'm liking this section, but then I'll see a shot and I'll think, boy, that is inartfully, terribly done. And then I'll see, there'll be a line of dialogue, there'll be a decision, and I'll just think, who's making this? Is this being made by a child who doesn't understand, sort of the way dialogue works to sort of suggest things? This is so on the nose.
Mm.
But I mean, I like the sort of idea of him bluffing his way through. I like the idea that this is sort of like a revolution that wasn't started by somebody who wanted to be a revolutionary. I like the idea of like word travels
Mm.
and, people build up the legends. We were talking about folklore before we started recording. I like that element of this. I like the importance of the post office. I mean, in early America, but the postmaster general was a sought after position.
Mm.
Franklin wanted it, and he sought for it. So, it is amazing how much we take that stuff for granted. And, and I like that. I like that sense of order. I like that, I like some of the values here. I like um, I like that basic approach to character. It is dark. It does kind of prefigure Walking Dead. I mean, there's the settlements kind of look
Mm.
really good for the most part. There's a lot of money being spent on that stuff. And then you get sort of lines of dialogue and, events and other depictions of characters that just seem very cardboard or who arbitrarily shift what they're doing, in ways that just don't make sense.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think I agree what you're saying, and I like this idea of um. I thought that I was expecting it to be really silly. Like I was really expecting to be like, you know, I might enjoy this, but it's going to be kind of dumb. It's all about the post office, but the fact that it highlights that once lines of communication are down, we take it for granted. Like you and I are talking between sort of like, um, Honolulu and a small village outside of Derby. Like we're really kind of like that's what we take for granted these days. But this film kind of highlights that, yeah, if you don't have any lines of communication, like distances grow like vast because like small distances can become vast distances. Like they don't know if the government's collapsed, they don't know what's going on. Sort of like two settlements over, it's too dangerous to travel that. There are no lines of communication. It kind of shows how we rely on those communications, and so for it to be the post, I got it, and I was like, oh well, yeah, we really do, need to sort of keep that in mind. And I like how that it spreads hope. I think it's a dark film, but it's kind of positive as well in some ways. It definitely is positive or hopeful. Um, and so I like this the approach that it takes. But then again, like you say, but then it becomes like there'll be scenes where it does things that are kind of cool and I like it and it's building on these values. And the next is like a really saccharine, clunky, kind of you know like you say, the dialogue sort of switches from being kind of straightforward to being like really like purpley and clunky, and you're just like the narration that pops up every now and then as well. The sort of I don't know, just sort of like articulating, like if just in case you don't get it, we are going to give you some really sort of heavy-handed dialogue about sort of like a prayer for the postman or some shit like that. And you're just like, I didn't need this. Like this scene is really a bit too much. Cut this crap. So yeah, I'm with you. Like, but I think I enjoyed it, and I do like where it goes. But yeah, some parts of it are kind of a struggle.
Well,
Um,
the other thing that occurs to me, and it sort of occurred to me kind of halfway through, was uh this movie is about the power of Kevin Costner. Like,
yes.
okay, so like as it starts, Kevin Costner is an actor who performs sort of it's not clear, badly acted Shakespeare accompanied by a donkey, sort of for humor. It's not really clear why this is funny. It's not really clear
Because the film
how
says it is.
he
That's why it's funny. It says it's funny. It's
I
not.
mean,
Yeah, but yeah.
but he's terrible at it. I mean, he's so terrible at it that you think, why would anyone enjoy this? I mean, maybe it's acceptable as a kid's show,
I think that's
in
what
a
it's about. Yeah, it's
post-apocalyptic
entertainment.
landscape, right?
I take it as entertainment, sure, and this is a kind of like farce, and it's kind of like a panto, and I was fine with that. Like, yeah, the horse
Yeah,
holding
I'm not. I
the
mean,
sword, the horse holding a sword, and that was I thought was funny. Or the horse, the asshole. I was kind of like, yeah, that's I could see why that would be a show.
I can see why that would, but his rendition of these lines is just terrible. And really, anyone could do this. I mean, this is not okay. But it occurs to me that the whole thing of this movie is that because he's an actor, acts as if he's a member of the postal service and bluffs his way through. And it's easy to see that as a con man, but it winds up inspiring hope. And it
Mm.
inspired hope, and hope is so important. And hope gave us America back. And so really, this is about the power of cinema and the power of an actor to change the world and restore human civilization.
This is where this film falls down for me a little bit. So you say about you saying, and you are right, and I agree completely. See, I had the same sort of realization when I realized that this was the same as the Negan years of The Walking Dead. And you have in The Walking Dead, you have like Rick Grimes versus Negan, and you have those two actors, and you have people sort of rallying behind them for certain things, and I realized that told this story better because you have to realize that like Rick Grimes is actually kind of like he doesn't want this, but like he knows it has to happen. He'll make difficult decisions and do all this other stuff. And so, the postman being a con man and stuff's like cool, okay, but I don't like Kevin Costner's okay in this. I like Kevin Costner. I think but he doesn't carry the weight or the sort of like it never feels like it's a true weight for him in the way that like it should with like Rick Grimes, where he's like, I regret having done this, but I know it's gotta happen. The other one in is Will Patton, who, again, is a character actor who's appeared in lots of things I've kind of liked, but I've always felt him as being kind of basically sort of like a B-list character actor that, he's done things, he's appeared and stuff. He's no Jeffrey Dean Morgan. Like, he has so little charisma in this film that I'm like, I don't understand why these people follow him. Like, he's
Mhm.
he's wooden and angry, and that's about it. Like, he has no charisma. And when I watch The Walking Dead, you can sort of go, oh, I know why people follow Negan. Like, I get it. Like, he's charismatic and he's sort of like, but he's brutal and terrifying. But I get the sort of like, he tells you that by following me, you are strong. And, I'm strong because of these things. And I will do terrible things to prove it. This never feels like that. So Will Patton kind of feels almost a bit like a joke throughout this. When he's trying to do things, I'm like, I don't take you as a strong man. I feel like I could take you in a fight right now. But you don't feel like a threat to anything.
Yeah, and I think that it doesn't help that the civilization that he's built is basically slave labor around a mine.
Yeah.
Um, there is that line after Kevin Costner is captured where you're told that the last guy who challenged him, he beat him in 6 seconds and cut out his tongue and cut off his balls, uh, and you think, really? Hey,
Yeah, exactly.
hard to imagine.
You'd buy that though, and you'd buy that from Jeffrey Dean Morgan
Yeah,
as Negan. That was my problem with this. Exactly that.
yeah, it is hard to think. It's hard to think why anyone would follow him, but it's also hard to think what is the advantage. Like, if there was one part that I really enjoyed most about that, it was once Kevin Costner, the unnamed protagonist, is
Mhm.
enslaved, and you see most people are sort of responding like, "Yeah, he's brutal, but I'm basically glad to be a part of this." And I like this sense of purpose that reminded me of sort of like like the Roman military or something
Mm.
where um they're being trained, but and maybe they don't approve of everything that they're going to be doing, and maybe it's a little brutal, but they have an esprit de corps that they didn't have before. And I like that. I thought, oh, okay, I kind of get this a little bit. But then that's thrown out instantly, and that's just important to that one sequence. And I think not only why would people follow him personally, but also what is the advantage of this system? I mean, they're basically just raiding other villages, but all they're getting out of it is like a little bit of military slave labor, and it's not clear that they're really living that well. They haven't built really much of a civilization, and by the end he's just obsessed with having a good opponent to fight, to
Mm.
challenge him. It seems very conflicted, and it certainly is. I think that choice really defines this movie versus Waterworld in a lot of ways, because
Mm.
you don't have the campy villain, right?
You need that. I mean, I'm not saying that that person has to go the full Dennis Hopper. I think that's a special kind of place to go. um, but you're right. You need a sort of a character. But I would even say, knowing what this is about. I mean, this thing about being a part of something, and there's the character played by Giovanni Ribisi, the sort of the young, when they're in the camp and they're being trained to become soldiers in this Bethlehem's army, and there's like the big sort of like mixed race guy, and then there's sort of Giovanni Ribisi, sort of like they're trying to look. Both talking about escape, and he has this thing of sort of like, no, I don't want to escape. Like I like because he's been bullied and all this other stuff, but he likes being a part of something. He's like, look, I get bullied and stuff, but I'm actually a part of something where I could be respected. I could work to a point where people respect me. And then when he actually is confronted, after Kevin Costner's Shakespeare, as they call it at that point, when he escapes and he's tracked down by those two, and he kills Ribisi's character, and he says, Giovanni Ribisi's character says, "Why did you ruin this for me?" Basically by killing him, like, why did you take this from me? And you can see there's a desperation, and I kind of feel like the other thing that's made me think about was like Andrew Tate was this thing about sort of like, I don't want to talk about toxic masculinity, but this idea of like machismo and being sort of like, you know, being a real man. Like there's all this talk about being in like, this man's army, this strong, we're strong. Like Bethlehem has this constant thing about being like the country failed because of weak people. We are just going to be sort of raising strong people. I mean, there's overtones of racism. It never, it sort of never really holds its own in that. It should really go for it. But like the guy, I don't know, I can't remember the actor's name. I've got to find him. But basically, the sort of the mixed race guy, Woody, he points him out, doesn't he? And says that oh, he's not pure blood, and they kind of mention it like once, and then they're like, "Oh, we're not doing that again." Like we don't want to be sort of getting into that, but we kind of want to allude to it. But I don't know. It just feels like I can see why there's this whole thing of being strong and being sort of like believe. I don't know, like this sort of almost like self belief of being important and strong because I'm a part of this thing, because I'm shitting on other people around me. And I kind of see that in these sort of like red pill kind of people. But it comes back to the fact that like I don't believe Will Patton is the person that's leading them because he never sort of feels that charismatic. But then also I don't feel that Kevin Costner has the right charisma to be inspiring this Postman thing. Like I don't know. Again, it feels like I could possibly have believed like maybe Mel Gibson would have had that kind of post Mad Max kind of thing. I don't know, but like, I don't know. Yeah, Kevin Costner feels basically the two leads in this feel miscast,
Mm.
and not enough for me to be really bothered. But it kind of sort of it stands out repeatedly when you're like, okay, this doesn't kind of work.
Yeah. So Brian Anthony Wilson is the one who plays Woody.
Yes,
Yeah, I mean, I think the racism issue is an interesting one because the racism is totally overt in the beginning, right?
and then
I
gone.
mean, yeah, and then it disappears.
Hmm.
And obviously Kevin Costner's second in command is a black kid.
Hmm.
And I like the idea of, oh, okay, the good guy is in favor of kind of multicultural America, except that's very subtextual. And the racism then disappears, right? And so I guess you talk about the actor and how this lack of charisma. I agree with you, but I also feel like this problem of villains is you either have to have a villain uh, where the villain is someone who you can understand why somebody would follow it, right? And oftentimes that comes down to charisma, but sometimes that comes down to the fact that they are providing an advantage for their people, right? They are following a reasonable strategy. They're the big team in town, et cetera, et cetera. It's the sort of like, yeah, Magneto thinks he's a good guy, right? It's that kind of thing. Or they have to be campy and a James Bond villain and over the top at, they're just fun. Waterworld obviously sort of takes the second. This wants to kind of take the first, but it doesn't. It's not only that it doesn't have, there's not enough charisma. It's that I don't have a sense of what advantage he's providing to anybody. I don't have a sense of like how core this racism is to his beliefs. This kind of like hyper masculinity is part of it. It seems very sort of toxic, but I don't know what they really believe outside of these brutal principles. And I don't know what life is really like there for anybody. So I don't understand the civilization that you're essentially watching be destroyed at the end of the movie and why it is inferior to, I know it's supposed to be inferior and except it's brutal and they're bad. But that's the campy thing, right? Like it's brutal and it's bad. Oh, he's the baddie. But at the beginning of the movie, he's not just the cartoon baddie. He's, the one who has the civilization and people want to join him for whatever reason, despite the racism. So, I mean, it just feels like very muddled.
Oh, no, I agree. And I think the thing is they keep trying to introduce or center on different versions of what it is that he represents. So when you have this beginning point, like the film very much breaks into sort of three parts. I'm going to say like I wouldn't even say it's like a 3-act structure. Like there are 3 stories that go on. It's very sort of like definitively 3 parts. This would be a better mini series, like without a doubt.
Yeah.
But when the sort of Shakespeare is, when Kevin Costner sort of the postman is captured and taken, the structure is the strong man with building up an army, and it's based around the mining camp. And you see the mining camp, you see the mining camp, you see all this kind of stuff. Not sure what the mining, don't know what it's for. Like I don't know what purpose it kind of serves, but they're building up this army. So there's like a quarry. So they're building something. And it does show you things like he has this sort of like opulent kind of office and area where he paints, and there's this kind of thing where he stands out over and sort of like looks over things. And so there's all these kind of elements that it's trying to show you that there's this base of operations where this sort of this structure exists, but it's all about the army. It's all about the sort of the militarization of this thing for whatever purpose. And it shows you ideas of like fears of violence because they like to watch The Sound of Music, and which is another film, but like they reject Universal Soldier being broadcast, which I thought was kind of funny. But so
I wondered about that.
Yeah,
like what's being said there outside of making fun of Dolph Lundgren in a recent movie, by the way.
Yeah.
At this point,
Oh, by the same studio, which I thought was hilarious. So I think it's this sort of like rejection of violence. I think there's meant to be this thing of like we only want to watch nice films, which let's be clear, The Sound of Music is still about the rejection of Nazism. So
well,
it's
also
a weird film,
like they throw rocks at this barge that is projecting the movie.
yeah.
I don't know how they throw it so far. It all, there's a lot of kind of like convenient cutting in this movie where you're like, how are they throwing rocks like a mile? I don't know. But, they're committing an act of violence against the Dolph Lundgren violent movie. I'm very confused by what.
Yeah. Oh, no, I think the film is. Because I say that's the thing. It shows this kind of militarization at the beginning. Because you've seen this small port and he comes in and is like, I want 3 men that are going to join the army, and it's like they will be under my command until I see fit, and there's all that kind of thing. It's all the militarization, that sort of thing. Then later on, he comes back to one of these settlements. I think it's called the Pine View settlement, where you meet a lot of the main characters, And when this is when he kills um the husband of the female main character, Abby, played
Michael.
by yeah, Michael, yeah, played by Olivia Williams, like her husband, and he kills him in the street. But there's this whole conversation about a feudal system. I am the Lord, and you are my, I let you do these things. And you're like, that's not really how this works, because a feudal system was based on a monarchy and an acceptance of, like, of land ownership and rental. That was the feudal system. Literally, is sort of like you are allowed to farm on my land, and you owe me thingy. So that doesn't quite work.
Yeah, it's
But
also a system of give and take. This is
yeah,
just a system of take and extortion at that point in the film.
yeah, because exactly like, so. The idea would be you get arms from these tips. Like if a feudal system would be like you end up getting arms from the rich and all this other stuff. So it never kind of. But this is the thing, like, and then throughout the film, and then by the third act, it's become something different again, where like it's almost become a campaign for conquering, and you're like, I don't understand what this is anymore. Like I don't think this knows what General Bethlehem's supposed to be achieving. Like, how does this manage it? How does it structure it? Like, again, it's kind of like it just feels loose, and it's like you say, it wants to be, as you said, type one of the villain that you can sort of go, he's a baddie, but he's got a plan, and I can sort of see he's trying to progress something. Or is he Dennis Hopper? And in this case, he sort of, it swings from one to the other, but it's not clear what this plan is, and he's not camp enough to be two, so he kind of falls in the middle of it all.
Yeah. I really like what you're saying about how the three acts are like three different movies and
Mm.
really present the villain in three different lights. And I really felt in that first act, like the only camp you've seen is the one camp where he's performed Shakespeare, right?
Yes.
So, and it is pathetic. There's nothing going on there. There's no civilization to speak of. And so when we get to Bethlehem's camp, we find out that, he's inherited it from this guy who came before him. He obviously has his own vision. And I thought it was very Roman with his focus on the military. It is demanding tribute, both in terms of, three people, but also in terms of goods and whatnot. And I thought, oh, okay, this makes sense. You see how that camp is sort of constructed of all these random, parts. And I think, okay, right. So they are ensuring their survival. But there's a sort of civilizational aspect to it. Not only is he painting, right, which is
Mm-hmm.
always the indicator of like a thoughtful,
Culture.
philosophical person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of shorthand, but I really feel as if, oh, okay, he's building something and it's designed to last, right? It is the only game in town,
Mm.
in terms of rebuilding a civilization. And that is the version that I think I like the best. And then, as you point out, in the second act, he's really just raiding. You say he talks about a feudal system, but it's really just petty and brutal. And he's just this kind of like petty, uh, raider, um, who isn't concerned about anything else. And then by the third, he's megalomaniacal and he's sort of the closest he is to Waterworld. Um, where we get the sort of like stereotypical, I just want a good opponent to fight. I'm so
Yes.
glad he brought the fight to me. You think this is the same person who was building a civilization in the first one, the beginning of the movie? So I think it's a very astute observation you make about sort of these three stages of presentation of this villain, and how I think they go from good to worst.
Oh, I agree. I 100% agree. I mean, that final line is, it comes to the confrontation at the end. Is you have the postal service as almost like an army, the uprising, and they ride onto this sort of potential field of battle, and then the postman pulls out the sort of the white flag to have the parley in the middle between the two leaders, and someone says maybe they're surrendering, and he says, I do hope not. He's looking for that victory, like that battle, that sort of, definitive win. And you kind of think like, yeah, this isn't the confident kind of leader you're supposed to be sort of feeling, or you've met at the beginning. Like you've almost become paranoid and insecure and all this other stuff that, like, this wouldn't have bothered you This wouldn't have, and this is where I keep saying like this whole thing around Negan, and I know I keep going on about it, but the presentation of Negan throughout sort of like even when things were going like shit at the end for the as it got to that confrontation and the battles, the point of Negan was it was his sort of like self-confidence throughout it all. It wasn't like I'm looking for the my nemesis, I'm looking for my ultimate opponent. It was more like, no, I'm going to crush these people one by one using my baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire. Like it's efficient and it's going to happen. Like this guy sort of like exactly like falls into that kind of maniacal, almost mustache twirling territory, and it's a
He's a Bond
shame.
villain at the end,
Yes,
right? I mean, he's
exactly.
just like James Bond has escaped again. Oh, I'm so grateful. Now I can get him another way.
Yeah. And there's all these rules, like you can challenge for leadership if you've been a part of the army. You get branded with the figure 8 on your arm and all this other stuff, and this idea of ownership. And so there's all these sort of bits that sort of when they fall into place or when they pay off, you're a bit like, oh, okay, this is you knew where you were going, but like it feels kind of silly by the time you get there. Um, so
3 hours later.
yeah, I mean, yeah, this is a long film.
That doesn't help.
Yeah,
Like,
but
the rule feels especially about challenging. Feels especially stupid, even when it's first said, but when it's brought up as the convenient sort of Deus ex machina, and at the very end of the third act, it feels especially convenient.
yeah. So we both agree that Will Patton is a bit of a sort of a weak link in this film, and I think a better actor could have been maybe even someone who's chewing the scenery a little bit more. The other version of this, I thought, I don't know if you watched the more recent Planet of the Apes trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the final one, which is War of the Planet of the Apes, and you have Woody Harrelson playing a similar kind of character, don't you? Where he's sort of like, he's got a military outpost and he sort of leads it almost like Colonel Kurtz kind of style. And he has the kind of fall. Like it feels like that's kind of like, he's a good foil for that as well. But he sort of knows he sort of strikes an interesting balance between the two of like, I'm trying to save humanity against I'm also going to kill all the apes kind of thing. So but he has the charisma to do that. I think Woody Harrelson sort of pulls it off better than in this.
Yeah, I can kind of tolerate a bad performance if the script knows what it's doing. But I agree, Woody Harrelson, I mean, I don't know when I've almost never disliked Woody Harrelson in anything. Yeah, so I mean, I would love something like that.
Yeah. Okay, let's move off the villain piece then. Let's move on to some of the plot points on this. So again, the film sort of falls into this sort of these three act structure. We talked about the first act. Shakespeare, or Kevin Costner's character, gets taken by the strongman army that Will Patton sort of General Bethlehem. When he escapes after, there's a whole thing about sort of like a lion has escaped. I like these things where like lots civilization has collapsed and so like zoo animals have escaped into the wild and stuff like that. So that all works. That's fine. Then he escapes and he comes across in the middle of nowhere a van or a truck that has a skeleton in it and it's a postman and there's bags of post. And he starts to read the post. What are your thoughts then on this thing of finding this truck and sort of
Yeah, I'm not bothered by it. I mean, if there's one thing that bothers me, it's the fact that like the skeleton has decomposed fully. So like that uniform should be fused to rotting flesh.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have to say the uniform bothers me throughout this multiple times. He has them all burned the uniforms later, and then he's got clearly the exact same uniform on for the finale as he did, sort of just before they burned it. I think, not sure how they made it, but it's clearly the same fabric and everything. Yeah, so I mean, okay, I don't know how that van got in the middle of nowhere, but I do like the idea that, the core idea of this film that he's burning the mail for fun. I mean, he reads it and you have the first kind of inclination of like the importance of the mail when you have this child's tooth. Um,
Hmm.
but it is sort of sentimental. I mean, of course, in all cases, I'm more interested in the sort of like historic civilizational implication, both of the villain and of, you know, male in history. Um, but yeah, I don't really hate this part. And I like the kind of like accidental con your way through it sort of way this all develops. What are your thoughts?
Um, no, I agree. I agree about the skeleton. I always find movie skeletons always make me chuckle because it's sort of like, oh, all the flesh and tendon and everything's gone, yet they're still sat there like wired together, like
Yeah, huh?
like no,
Right.
they would fall apart. That's just what they do. Um, so that always makes me laugh. But no, I think finding the post, the bit where he is reading the post, and it's sort of about like so and so has achieved this, and the little boy is sort of writing to his granddad to tell him about he's lost his tooth. It's interesting watching this. I mean, this came out in '97, and you're never really told when the plague hit. Again, there's no sort of like until the end. At the very end, you find out he was born in 1970. He was born in 1973 and died in like 2040 something or other. So you get
And there's
time
the
to.
Vietnam vet who you get an age for, right?
Oh
But
yeah,
outside of that, it's pretty ambiguous.
yeah. So there's those sort of elements where you're like, okay, I don't really know when this is taking place. But what's interesting as well is this is obviously come out in '97, and email is just sort of starting and stuff. So the post is, physical mail is about to be sort of on the decline. So it's kind of interesting to sort of see it from that perspective. But no, I thought it was good. The point that kind of the bit that annoyed me, and it's convenient. It has to be convenient. I know, I get that. Was like he grabs the bag because he's like the bag could be useful. So I've got this bag that I can then put things in. It just happens to have mail left in it. Like he doesn't intentionally take mail. He just grabs the bag. He's like, oh, I can put stuff in this. I can food, whatever. And then when he comes to the settlement and they're trying to, they're threatening to throw him out or shoot him, he drops the mail out and starts searching through and just happens to find a letter to someone that is addressed to someone that is in that settlement.
Yeah, I think the way there's another scene like that later too, as he's delivering the mail to another settlement
Mm,
and, says, "Oh, that's enough." Yeah, where he clearly has a bunch of mail from just the first town that he's visited. Um, yeah, I was bothered by that too. In fact, he's got three letters for that,
yeah.
that town. It seems like all of the letters should be for that town or none of them. Like
Hmm.
that guy should be going there or not. Yeah, I was also annoyed by that. But look, of all the things I'm annoyed by in this movie, but that is yet another thing that sort
Yeah.
of annoys me.
No, that kind of, yeah. I don't know. It just,
If there's a simple solution, which is the bag says like, the route on it, and it's all to that town, and that's why
mm.
he decides to go to that town. That's the simple solution there.
Oh, I agree.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
Make it intentional, at least a little bit. Like he's, oh, you know, oh, finding, like, there should be almost an assumption of like, well, if this van's here, this van shouldn't be found in the middle of nowhere. Like if this van is here, that tells me that there's a settlement or there's at least a town nearby. Oh, that might be a settlement, you know, and so
mhm.
it should lead him there rather than sort of seem accidental. Um,
Yeah, and he just sees it across the bridge, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's all accidental,
it's
as
all
you say.
accidental. So that would bother me, and then the fact that everyone welcomes him, and the sheriff, it becomes like typical. Then it's kind of wrote that everyone else is like, let's listen, and he gives the con, but the sheriff is, I don't believe in you. There's always going to be the one non-believer. Um, so this is one of those scenes that really sort of annoyed me when, not annoyed me, that sounds wrong, but like I was saying, the weaker scenes is I'm trying to eat I'm trying to eat my this soup and stuff, and everyone's gathering around him to hear the tell of whatever's going on in the rest of America. And I'm like, this kind of feels a bit like, everyone's gathering around to listen to Captain Walker kind of thing. I'm like, this is how
Mhm.
far from society have they fallen? If he remembers and the sheriff remembers, but we know people that survived who were alive before this plague. Like again, this film has
Mhm.
this thing of like these people have either fallen massively away from society, or actually are these people that survived the plague and
Mhm.
remember the pre apocalypse period. It seems really inconsistent that like they're all gathering around and they're amazed at like the mail and all this other stuff. You're like, you'd have have more cynical and sort of kind of you know non-believing people, I'm sure. Like it all feels a bit too convenient, this whole scene, and it feels really clunky.
Well, there's another case of this sort of inconsistency, and I spotted that same sort of thing of like how they all spot that, and it's not clear how much time has passed and what they really know.
Mm.
One of the things they ask him is whether um what is it, Bethlehem's predecessor
Oh
is
yes,
is dead. But Bethlehem comes and visits them a few
regularly.
scenes later,
Yeah,
and they clearly it's not the first time he's been there, so they clearly know that guy must know that guy's dead. And there are a number of so what, like with the president and sort of what's happened, um, there are a number of just outright inconsistencies like that where this world keeps shifting scene to scene, and that scene that you're talking about now, as they sort of gather around him and ask questions, is the biggest offender. Like,
mm.
that again, I don't know why that script wouldn't be cleaned up. Like, that's the scene where you don't really know how this world works yet, so that was the draft. But my God, go back in and clean it up once you're done with the movie. Make it consistent with the rest. I don't know how that didn't happen here.
No, I agree. It feels like, and this is why I say that this film feels like three different films. When you're sort of like, oh, this because the things seem so inconsistent across things. But there's also this is to me this is the impact of Mad Max. When I watched this, and we talked about this when we watched Mad Max, and we were quite sort of keen to point certain things out that Australia gets away with certain things because it's kind of pointed out in the first one that civilization was on the decline. It was on the sort of like it was falling apart, but things were trying to sort of stick around. But they were in the outback, like they were sort of like on the sort of the outskirts of the outback rather than thing. And also, Australia has sort of a low population across a massive, massive um, piece of land. So, there are massive stretches, much like America, not disputing that, but America's much more densely populated. So you can have like these whole things in the desert and out in the outback in sort of in the Mad Max. But then when the fall comes, it's like everyone's now wearing kind of crazy clothes and doing all these sort of these civilizations have popped up in weird places, like in a dam or whatever. And you go, okay, cool. But in this, it kind of feels like it doesn't feel like it's been long enough. Because like I don't understand why, but they're like, oh, we've left. Who's left in this? Why are people not in cities? Like, America's not America's not sparsely populated enough that one of these things couldn't be like we're going to give people some rations and we're going to send them out. Is this in Oklahoma? I can't remember. He says it. It's sort of is it Idaho? I can't remember where he says
It's like Oregon. It's the
Oregon.
Pacific
Thank you.
Northwest. Yeah.
So again, cool. Send
Where
some people out. There must be cities out that you can go find and
what's going on in Seattle?
yeah.
Right. Uh, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's a very good point, and I do think you're right that this is the Mad Max effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
And really, it's the rural urban split.
Mm.
And that's true in your country. It's true in
Mm-hmm.
mine. It's true in Australia. I mean, most of Australia has almost no population, but everybody's down in Sydney,
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I mean that is true. So, but we don't really know like why is there not connection? I mean, there's like the skies are messed up. You don't really know why, but I mean, you're right. It does seem as if like civilization has completely collapsed. it's a little bit of like the sort of like Star Wars thing, right? I blame Star Wars for everything, right? Where it's like, oh, we remember the Jedi. How long ago was this? Like the Jedi were a myth, you
Yeah.
know. Like, okay, how, but I mean, there it's a fantasy, they can get away with it until the prequels. But, here it's in our world, right? I mean, there should be some logical questions to ask here.
No, I agree. I think this is this thing about like again, just to use the examples, Mad Max is out in the outland, but you can Australia has different geographical points. So they even joked. Have you ever seen the Simpsons episode where they Bart versus Australia, where they have the joke of sort of like he phones up Australia and says to some boy, "Can you go speak to your neighbors?" And the little boy comes out and rides off, and it's like 10 miles to his next neighbor. And then when he comes back and stuff, there's an expansive area. But usually about the rural and sort of city split. Yeah, I live sort of semi-rural. But if everything was to go to Pat, like, and if we had like bikes or horses, whatever, doesn't take too long for me to get to a more densely populated area to be like, what's going on? Like,
Mhm.
we've lost power and communication in the village, but I'm gonna go to like Leicester or wherever. Like, it's not far enough away. Even smaller towns like near here, I'll be like, okay, I'm gonna go there. What's going on? Yeah, this feels just kind of like they seem to have chosen to be out in the waste or into the sort of into these different places, but there's no explanation as to why they've. There's no. It's never said like we've left the cities for a reason, or do you know what I mean? We don't.
Yeah,
We haven't attempted to communicate. Like at one point, someone even says, who's he's was he called? Was he called Starkey? He names a new
yeah,
president. Oh, it's
right.
Richard Starkey or whatever. Like he's in this other place is now the Washington's gone. And someone says
Yeah.
that we know Washington's gone. Cool. How do you know that? What happened
Well, he
that
says
took?
I was there at the battle, where the White House burned, right? And
Mm,
so then Kevin Costner's forced to say, "Oh yeah, well they moved I think they say they moved it to Minneapolis."
yes. So
Like
yeah.
it's utterly ridiculous. But no offense to Minneapolis, St. Paul residents, but I mean, it's a little like moving it to St. Louis or something. Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's hard to imagine all that would have happened.
But
Yeah, okay, we live in an era of email and stuff,
mm,
but still, I mean, and again, you could kind of get away with this with a little more dialogue, right? I
hmm
mean, it is true that like urban centers don't produce enough food and power to maintain themselves. They are, tremendous engines of innovation and economy, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, in a crisis, they might not wind up being the best place to be. Okay, well, a couple lines of dialogue that say, you know, uh, these, Portland's gone, would go a long way.
no, I agree. I think this comes to this thing about you say like there's this bit more of sort of the history of what caused this thing. Um, what because they mentioned like a plague at one point or there's something else of like what's driven them out. Cool. What is it? And then there's this guy, yeah, they mentioned this predecessor to General Bethlehem, and then they mentioned this thing about a battle that's where they saw the White House burn. Okay, so what happened? Like, was this a plague broke out and government broke out and there was a division? There was a civil war? Was there
Yeah, who was fighting who?
who was yeah, like who was
Yeah.
the battle with? Like I need to understand we need more information to try and put these things in context. And if you then realize that General Bethlehem is given legitimacy because he is sort of like, he was a part of this sort of army that caused the collapse of the United States, then you're like, oh, that would make a lot more sense. That will work. That's why people are following him because he has almost like this lineage, like we have like a feudal system or like a monarchy or whatever. It would add so much more. And take out all the saccharine bullshit about later on about the sacrifice of the post and actually give me some facts. Like the first
Right.
part of the film should really settle that. There should really be an explanation of like a conversation of like, I remember when and this is what happened and blah blah blah. Instead of them dancing around it. So it really is an oddity.
Yeah, even the fact that there's been this predecessor to
mm,
Bethlehem is a key problem. Because you would imagine how long did he reign, right? He clearly put this group together, carved it out of nothing, built this kind of civilization up in this mining camp. Okay, how long did that take? How long ago was this disaster? People talk about it as if it's in living memory, but
hmm
obviously not a child's living memory.
yes.
Okay, they clearly still value the United States. Like the flag means something, the symbolism still means something. All right. Well, these are all reasons to maybe nail this down a little better. It doesn't have to be all that much nailed down, but I think, the cities, the United States, why the White House burned. I mean, just, a little bit would go a long way there.
I agree. I think just sort of a little bit of a just a framework to work from, to give it to what because the other thing, like you said, this is based in the sort of the Pacific Northwest. And so I am still thinking like, so how far is like General Bethlehem's reach then? Is this just regional? He's clearly not,
Yeah, I,
because
I
what
think it clearly is just regional. Um,
mm,
but I wonder, right? Does it extend to the coast? Um, because like, Oregon is vastly different between
mm,
like the well-populated coast, which tends to be very liberal, right? That's why it's a blue state, and the, 75% that is away from the coast and
yeah.
is really very forested, very, very conservative.
Mm.
Um, and I think this is true in a lot of states, but
But
yeah, I mean, this all takes place in that conservative, forest region. So has Bethlehem Kant, does his reach extend to the coast?
mm,
What's going on the coast, right? Like, is there shipping? Are there fishing villages there? I mean, we're supposed to think that by the end, the Postman is part of some sort of like civilizational renewal, but we have no reason to really believe that there isn't a very different civilization, if not a
well,
thriving one, on the coast,
well,
or
even
even just a few miles north or south.
yeah. Well, one of the other things is towards the end of the film, the character Fred Lincoln Mercury, who we find out is actually the one that starts to spread the idea, played by Lorenz Tate. He obviously, he's the one that actually really instigates this thing. Like, Kevin Costner's the postman, sort of like becomes the legend, becomes the road warrior, if you will. And then the story is told, and the story expands, and he creates the structure around it, and the organization. But at the end of it, when um, Ford Lincoln Mercury is taken by the army and is held hostage, he's about to be executed, and he's introduced to another postal worker. That postal worker, he says he's from California. So again, I'm like, oh, so the word has spread. Like this thing has said. So is this a result? Oh no, he recognizes the name Postmaster
Mhm.
Ford Lincoln Mercury. So he sort of salutes him as it's an honor, like you are the one that started all this. So it's clearly spread. But then my question is, cool, that's fantastic, that's amazing. But what's happening? Can he not turn to him and be like, what's happening in California?
Right.
What's it like down there? Like, it seems really bizarre that the postal service idea travels, but like, is General Bethlehem one of like many? Is this army sort of spread across
Well, he
the states
clearly
and
must have some sort of connection to Northern California, right? I mean, except maybe that postal route has extended. I mean, but if it has, don't the two postal services know about each other? I mean, I don't know. There are a number of factors at play in that scene there. Um, One thing is like the power of this idea. It's like, this myth of the postman is like, Christianity took, 100 years to reach this point that has been spread in, a couple years or something. But that's the other point that I want to bring up is what is the timeline of this movie? So
Yeah.
Kevin Costner leaves. And he's conned his way through this town, and impregnated this woman. Under now it feels like, is that rape? Like
No,
if we
because
have gone back in time and said that, okay, the like Revenge of the Nerds, right? Like
hmm
that's rape. You're impersonating not you, okay. Somebody is impersonating the boyfriend, right?
Yeah.
That's clearly rape. Okay. Here, it's all false pretenses, right?
No, she asks him. She says her husband
Yeah,
is so she had an original husband who beat her because they couldn't have children. And she was made to think it was her. But then she realized it wasn't. She was able to
right.
and then but this other husband knows it's not. He can't. He's infertile. He's
Michael.
Newt
Yeah.
Michael. So they come to um the postman to be like, look, you're strapping and gorgeous and handsome Kevin Costner. Can you please have my baby? And so she comes to him to be
That
like,
is, by the way, most people's reaction to Kevin
well,
Costner. This movie would have you believe, right?
exactly like, yeah, like, well, he does direct this film. Like, I think that must be it. George Lucas's
Yeah.
direction is usually sort of like, sort of like faster and more intense. Kevin Costner's is sort of like more admiration for me, please. Every scene, everyone
That
should
is true. You
everyone,
really get that
yeah.
idea from this movie,
Oh
right?
yeah,
Like this,
100%.
I mean,
Well,
and
yeah,
like I said, my theory is that an actor can save civilization. Really, the point is Kevin Costner can
yeah,
save civilization, right?
yeah.
He'd be busy wandering into towns, just making it up, as he goes along. But the sheer power of his acting would
hmm
inspire people to imitate whatever it was that he was pretending. Multiple states away, civilization would just rebuild through the sheer force of his beauty and his acting strength.
That's right. Yeah, through the will of his sort of receding hairline and his flowing locks. I mean, that's sort of just
But
it.
but this poor woman still thinks that he is part of this postal service and that he's somebody that he's not, right?
Yeah,
And
but that's
okay, I know I don't buy I don't know the infertility thing, right? Like it has to
mm.
do with this vague apocalypse, and this is one of those moments where it almost becomes like the before four times, where it's like,
Oh,
why do you have different terms? Like
yeah.
you're his body parent, kind of, like, everybody's got infertility. That never comes up again. That's
Mm.
not important to this world. Um, yeah, but I mean, it is a little weird, right? I mean, do you not feel a little weird about that scene?
Um,
You think she'd
kind
say
of.
yes anyway
I think
because
so because I
the
think
point
her
is
in
Kevin Costner's handsome.
yeah, I think it's less about him being the post and more about him being. I think that there are two elements to it. She says to him like, "You're clearly healthy and traveled," but also the other element is, "Oh, you travel, which means you're leaving." And they make
Yeah.
a good point of, we've seen others do this because there are some that are fertile and some that are infertile. This has been done within the community, and they actually have the story about sort of like where they've done it, but it hasn't gone well because then it's led to like jealousy or the child's been born and there's been all these arguments. So her other point is, you're going, so that kind of makes you a bit more of a sort of appealing candidate to become the sort of the body parent for my child because you're not going to be here to cause jealousy and all that sort of stuff.
It just occurred to me that the clearest this movie is about the apocalypse and the world in which everyone's living is when it is necessary to get Kevin Costner laid. That's the
Very,
only time
that's
this movie cares about any of those
that's very
details.
true. That is very true. Yeah, yeah. And that was clearly that's what Kevin Costner was like. That scene needs to be perfect, and yeah,
All the details must be spelled out because
yes.
I'm about to get it on.
Well, again, this is this thing about this character, and you can't help but compare this to these other apocalypse films, especially when it's sort of it's in the Mad Max vein, isn't it? This kind of like the wanderer in the wilderness comes out and sort of attaches to civilization. I would have no qualms that like the Road Warrior, the Mad Max of like 2 and 3, would of course be like, yeah, all right, I'm gonna sleep with you. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what's the
Right.
deal? What do I get out of this? Like, because he was always about the deal, wasn't he? Like, what am I gonna get out of this?
And he was sort of amoral. That was part of the
Exactly.
charm of that character.
Yeah. With this, like with they want to make the Kevin Costner character that sort of that anchor of morality at some point. Like even later on, this is one of those problems I have with this character. Like even later on, when he's sort of trying to be gruff and saying like, grabs that girl and he's like, get off the horse, like I'll do the route, or burn your uniforms or sort of stuff. Like it never feels convincing because he's never like gruff enough to be like, oh, you are angry with these people. Like he's just too clean cut. So he's too white bread to be
Yeah.
of any sort of like real, you know. Um,
Well, there is a scene in this movie where after he leaves that first town, where I sort of thought, oh, like he's doing a kind of decent job of looking sort of down and out, of,
mm,
looking at the end of his rope, bumbling through it. And then suddenly every shot of him is like flowing clean hair, and I'm like, oh, he's the movie Kevin Costner from here on.
mm,
It
yeah.
seemed very apparent to me. But I want to go back to this issue of the timeline,
Hmm.
which is, so he leaves that town, and then he is accosted in seemingly the next town over, and that town is assaulted. So clearly this is, days, weeks later. The entire movie basically has to take place within a year.
Yes. Well,
Because she's pregnant. Right.
the baby's not born until the end. So
Okay. So, and he spends the winter in a cabin with her. She's pregnant for the whole time.
mhm.
And that is that winter. So this movie basically begins like around fall and of one year. They go through the winter in the cabin. Clearly, when they come back, the myth of the postman is already there, and there are 18 routes, and like an entire civilization has developed in
Yeah.
a few months, which were, by the way, the winter months where it was
Mm.
the most hardest to travel. And there's an army of postmen, and a whole mythology that's been built up. Very shortly, you encounter the person from California.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like this movie has to take place over a very small, span of months, but really, it's as if, you know, a few decades have passed in terms of the
To,
change of the folklore.
no, it's funny you say. So in my head, I asked the same question because the child, the pregnancy kind of like is the barometer, isn't it? Like
Mhm.
so okay, and obviously he doesn't sleep with her till about, I don't know, 40 minutes, 45 minutes into it, so, and this is a 3 hour film. Um, so, all right, how long was he, what happened? How long is that first part? Like, how long was he in the encampment with Bethlehem? You see them doing these runs and other stuff. I'm like, that's probably like a week or two. Like, he's not there
Mhm.
very long. And as you say, so it sort of like it gauges round. So, like, yeah, if you would say this is September to September, like, you know. But then I'm like, but this kind of thing would probably, you could run this and it'd be like over 5 years. Like that would, that's on like a minimum to me. Like, oh, 5 years for this all to sort of fall in place
For
would
the
kind
myth
of,
to spread and
for the myth to
everything, and,
spread
and
and to
the
become
postal
a,
service to grow. And
yeah, like,
yeah,
because
I,
you
I
can't,
agree that, and 5 years is, pretty fast.
oh yeah,
That's
that's what I'm saying.
definitely a minimum.
That's a
Yeah.
minimum for me. I was like, that feels like it should be. I'm curious now. I didn't know this was based on a book. And obviously a book can have a different sort of time span. I'm curious to see how the book handles it. So yeah, no, I agree. The timeline is kind of weird in this film.
Yeah, and every time they get back to these changes, I mean, even at the end, he wanders off, and you see yet more changes. These vast changes that take place. Basically, every time Kevin Costner is away, people start talking about Kevin Costner, and entire civilizations grow up, cargo cults develop, and form entire societies based on Kevin Costner. That happens like every time Kevin Costner leaves a party, he talks to the
Yeah,
people the next day, and they're like, oh, we have religious icons to you. Like,
this is the statue. Yeah, I mean, like this is it's the way I took this. This is sort of how I sort of felt about this at the end. you have to almost take this as like, because you find out that the end of the film is the child is a girl, and it's the girl that has been narrating these bits and pieces, and she's presenting this ridiculous statue at the end. And I want to talk about the final scene when we get there. But you find out that it's sort of like it's this retrospective that she is looking back and she's saying about this sort of period of what her father did. Who was the postman? And see, there's a kind of like I almost took it as like, is this like an untrustworthy narrator? Like,
Yeah, you're
is it?
trying to pull a Mad Max and say like, this is all part of the legend of the Postman,
Yeah, like
right?
this is a
Yeah.
folklore. This is we said about folklore, and we said you said about we were talking about just before we came on air was this idea of like folklore and how it changes, it gets added to, facts get dropped because they don't fit a narrative that would expand. So like this could have been like a 5 year period, but she's like, no, but the story is that it happened over a year, and that's the legend that we know. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense. The level of civilization they've returned to by the end of the film doesn't make any sense either, but that's besides the point. Like the speedboats in the background, that's weird. Um, so yeah, but you are right. The timeline of this doesn't make sense. Um, I still want to get to this idea of like as Kevin Costner as the postman. The more I think about it, the more I feel like he's miscast, or him. It's this self-indulgent. This is his sort of like self-indulgent project of like the Messiah thing. Like because we know
Mhm.
he's done this because that thing of him being, as you said, sort of like the way that this film views him through this almost like Hollywood lens throughout the most of the film is not how he is in Waterworld.
Mhm.
Because in Waterworld, like he's repeatedly shown to be like is gruff and is dirty and sort of his hair's all lank and all this other stuff. Like he's shown to be kind of different. But I didn't buy him in that sort of role either. Like I almost feel like yeah, it's fine, but he kind of feels a little bit miscast. This is a character where I'm like, who could who would do this? Who could do this? And I don't think there's times when I was like, oh, could a young Clint Eastwood have done this? That sort of wonder. I was like, no, he's too serious. He's too dour. Like he can do kind of comedy, but like I don't think he would have that you know You need someone with you kind of need someone with gravitas and gruffness. But I don't know who could have done this. But it's that thing of they need to feel.
Maybe Tom Hanks, I mean, he's maybe a little too, I mean, this would have been a sort of younger, but he's got the acting chops. I mean, he could
Mm,
be that inspirational kind of, figure. Um, he'd have to gruff himself up. Um,
yeah, you
I don't
need
know.
someone. You need someone who can do silly because the film at the beginning is that sort of thing of being a performer and entertainer, and then be enough to be serious and to be sort of for you to almost be not panicked, but like again they need to feel like a threat. Like if they got angry,
Mm.
again like people would back them. That oh, this person's been able to do this stuff. I don't know. Yeah, I suppose there are actors that sort of need to be. Tom Hanks would be an interesting one. Um, I don't
Yeah, I
think
agree.
I don't know.
Yeah, I agree he's miscast, but I think that worse than that is the worshipful way he's treated.
Hmm. Very
This
quickly.
yes, I mean, the clearly like the way the movie worships this character is part of the problem.
Mm.
And I like aspects of this movie. I like, the importance of the postal service. I like this idea of conning your way into it. Um, some of the best parts are him, in that first town, sort of thinking, I got to get out of here. Like they're
Yeah.
relying on me too much. This is, um, they're giving me too much mail. This sort of stuff. And I like this idea, but that's a con artist.
Hmm.
And, you know, if that's a con artist that wound up changing history and spreading civilization, that's fine. I mean, look, I come from a country of con artists who changed human history. I mean, I like that idea. History is rough and tumble and unpredictable and ideas matter. I like all of those ideas in play, but she shouldn't be treated as if he is a messiah figure. And as if he is somebody who everybody's, instantly falls in line with and wants to sleep with, and is always shot adoringly.
Hmm.
Um, all of that is just a problem for that kind of gray narrative. And the funny thing is, Kevin Costner, even back then, he loved the westerns, right? He already directed Dances with Wolves, and
Hmm.
this is a kind of western. Um, this is before
Oh,
the
this is Western mythology.
Horizon debacle.
Yeah, yeah. This is Western mythology. I mean, this is wholly fairy tale in the form of the Western. Like, definitely. Yeah.
But like, the best westerns very much have that gray morality.
Mm.
Especially, um spaghetti westerns onward. Certainly have that very gray morality. And it's almost as if Kevin Costner can't, he wants to play a leading man from the 50s.
Like a
And he
Cary
looks
Grant,
like it.
like a
Yes.
like a matinee idol kind of thing.
Yeah, he wants to be Cary Grant, not Humphrey Bogart, right?
Yes.
Like, he cannot embrace that kind of gray aspect. And this is really a Humphrey Bogart role. And he's not a guy who really does that.
Bruce
He's a guy who
Willis.
plays the, yeah.
That would have
Good.
as you was describing that then, like I'm thinking, like you said, modern Humphrey Bogart. I'm like 90s Bruce Willis would have been
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, and one of the interesting things there is that he's got that swarmy swagger, that but still has that charisma.
Hmm.
And he manages to he play good guys who still have that edge to them. Yeah. So he could have pulled it off.
Yeah. I think, yeah,
But
it's
it,
interesting.
but I do think that this fundamentally is a movie that wants to have that worshipful kind of 50s, you know, feel to it. It's shot that way. I mean, it's just a world of like the early Clint Eastwood stuff, right? I mean,
Hmm.
it's John Wayne, right? Almost, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's like this is really a John Wayne movie, but the script isn't a John Wayne script. But it's shot like it's a John Wayne movie. It's directed as if he thinks it's a John Wayne movie.
Yeah. I mean, this is yeah. Well, we have to acknowledge like this is a film sort of like starring Kevin Costner, directed by Kevin Costner, and this is a Kevin Costner movie, out
Yeah.
and out. Um, how this got funded as a 3 hour sort of like mythic Western kind of, obviously it was based on a book, that sort of thing. Like this got funding from a studio, like it was clearly sold on the Kevin Costner thing. It comes 2 years
Post
after
Waterworld
post
too.
Waterworld.
Yeah, like
Yeah. So, someone believed in it, and it was able to sell it. So you're right though, but there are several shots or even scenes where Kevin Costner is. You're right. I think that the more I think about it, there are shots where it's like he has like the heroic, that upward kind of like
yeah.
he's always sort of looked to be tall. He's always shot from below to make him sort of look that sort of thing. But even when like it all goes pear shaped and they escape the town and they're trapped in that cabin, and Abby, the character, sort of like she's shown to be some more strong-willed. She sort of like she kills the horse so they have some meat, and all these other things. Like she's much more sort of proactive, and I think Olivia Williams is very good in this.
Mhm.
And he's like, oh, I'm injured and trying to sort of like shirk responsibility, and it's not until she sort of falls in the river that he sort of springs into action and helps. Even then, like he doesn't play he's not clear. He's clearly sort of trying to sort of, I don't know, is he supposed to be sort of like not cowardly, but like, he is
Yeah, he doesn't
avoid.
play swarmy enough
No.
in that, right? I mean, that whole sequence is really frustrating to me because I like the idea. I mean, I like the idea of characters holed up for the winter in a log cabin. I mean, I like this kind of like recovery, He's barely escaped with his life. I like that she's more strong-willed than he is.
Mhm.
But it never really resolves like why he didn't get up. I mean, she keeps trying to get him to stand and get exercise, but then he gets up and he's shot like the Hollywood hero and he's moving quickly. And, if you've been lying all winter in a,
Yeah.
blanket, you're not going to be running around looking great. Um, again, he looks great, the shooting the horse happens off
Mhm.
screen. Then, she is, loses control in a river and gets swept downstream, but not very much downstream because, he hears her and runs to, and then she's already clearly able to get out or at least,
It's
attached to
yeah. I
I
think
mean,
it's meant to be the cold, isn't it? 'Cause it's done. This is all during the snow as well. So,
mm. Yeah,
um,
it just seems like a very like he's shot very heroically, but I'm not sure why he,
yeah.
looks so good and is able to run when he didn't before. I guess it was,
But this is the,
symbolically it's the spirit of rescuing somebody brings out the best in you, except
but let's.
it doesn't feel like she's really in that much jeopardy all of a sudden, and then she burns the cabin down for no reason. Um, and so I want to like this. There's stuff I like. And this is the movie in microcosm. It's like there's
Oh, it
stuff I
is.
like here,
Yeah.
but there are so many weird choices and weird directing choices and weird shots.
There's this thing about, and it comes to this. And you are right. This whole sequence is both really good and really bad, and that's what you said. This the whole film in like microcosm is there stuff that I really like. Even like with some of the characters I dislike, I'm like, this is good stuff. I can like it in this scene, but overall it kind of feels wonky. But again, they escape. There's a whole shootout where she comes out and she's all brave and she saves sort of like the postman. So there's this sort of like confrontation where he sort of he is marked out as because General Bethlehem comes to a town. The postman is marked out as a representative of the established restored government, so he's sent out to negotiate. But because he's now clean shaven, he's not recognized. But it turns into a shootout and they escape. Okay, so there's all that, and then he rides for a period of time, having been shot, and then he basically keels over off the horse, and she sort of gets him to the cabin, all sort of stuff. So you're like, okay, so is he brave? Because he went out to sort of negotiate this thing, and then it sort of went a bit pear-shaped. That wasn't his fault. So is he brave? And is he sort of like, it's just there's this. They're never sure how they want to present, other than being the heroic figure, and that's the problem. They never really want to sort of show. They're not sure how to show this character. I mean, for example, at the very beginning of the film, as you say, when he goes into the first settlement and he performs this comedic thing with the horse or with the donkey and the sword and that. And then when Bethlehem turns up, he's sneaking out of town. Like he is caught sneaking out of town. So is he cowardly? Is he sort of like, oh God, he says like, oh, we don't deal with civilization. Like I have no allegiance and that sort of thing. So the problem is he has no real arc. I don't because they don't want to show him as being the opposite of
Swarmy.
heroic, smarmy, yeah, at any point,
Yeah.
or the opposite of heroic, or anything at any real point.
Petty. Yeah.
Yeah, like yeah, even when he's being a con man, it's kind of like it never feels.
Yeah, there's a heroic aspect to it, right? I mean, like he
Yeah,
says he did it for food, and that's a good line, right?
mm,
Later on. But he seems kind of like he's not trying to hurt anybody. He's, like, yeah, he's conning them, but it's like the nicest, most well-intentioned con job you've ever seen.
mm,
It's like a good guy doing a con job reluctantly. Yeah, you're very right. I mean, and it's not that the movie doesn't want to have an arc for that character, right? That arc is clearly there. We're talking about the arc of, even in the woods. Like, I think he goes out to confront Bethlehem because he has to, because the
mm-hmm.
entire town
Tells him
says,
to.
well, you have to, right? You're the representative of the government. And either he has to say, actually, guys, I'm not, and sneak out the back door somehow, or he has to go out and do this and basically face the music. Um, and then he escapes, right? And it's really in the cabin where he learns to care for other people, except
He
he
doesn't.
always has. I mean,
Yeah,
again, it's the inconsistency of this film that, you're right to say. I mean, it's like he's got the same arc of learning to care about people, but he goes through it like 6 times,
Yeah.
and it's inconsistently presented all 6 times.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is it. I think it's because Kevin Costner does not want to be shown to be
Mhm.
the bad. I mean, this is like Dwayne Johnson not wanting to lose a fight in a film. This is the kind of bullshit you get. But again, like I try not to laud Mel Gibson too much, but like in Mad Max, like there's no even with Tom Hardy, like they're like, oh no, Max is not a good person. Like he doesn't want to do this shit. Like he's not particularly heroic. He kind of just gets stuck and you said amoral. Like it's kind of we're kind of comfortable that that is the character. Um, and again, look, Clint Eastwood's done these kind of characters where it's kind of the man with no name, the spaghetti westerns, but he's also done it in Hollywood. Sort of like he's even been an outright villain, like High Plains Drifter, and all. He's done it in westerns and stuff. This kind of feels like you need to play cowardly to then become the hero. I mean, that's this should really be a Campbellian journey, shouldn't it? Like this should totally
Yeah.
be a straightforward hero's journey. That like at the start he's a bit of a sort of a sniveling coward, and by the end of it, he is at the front of the thing and accepting his fate as you know whatever and sacrificing himself to bring down General Bethlehem and lead the clan. Like it should be. It's kind of, in fact, if anything, this should be really straightforward, but it's not. And it feels like there's an ego that's kind of preventing that.
No, I agree, and it's clearly there in the direction. Who I was thinking of was, yeah, although he would have been young for the part, I think, as Sam Rockwell, who does that kind of
Mm-hmm.
swarmy thing so well. Like he would have nailed the early stuff, and by the end, it would be like, oh, he's acting out of obligation. Like he really has learned. You know, yeah. So I mean, I want, but the thing is, like we've talked about, like Philip K. Dick, and
Mm-hmm.
how this instinct to present yourself in this Hollywood perfect way always ends up failing, right? That
Mm-hmm.
it never works. And it's always these smarmy characters who are more relatable and are more interesting. And that's where, you want to put the weight in that presentation. Everyone knows you're an actor. Nobody holds it against you. You're just going to get the accolades. If anything, I mean, this needs to lean into that. And instead, it leans so heavily the other way, including, I mean, the worst moment of this is one when he is abandoning his job as a postman, and he sees a boy with a letter and rides past because he doesn't care, and then sees the boy there, and the the film pauses so painfully long and then shows him in slow motion turn the horse around and ride back. This is one of the most mind-boggling bad choices of the entire movie. And but again, is so illustrative of this directorial debacle of having
Mm.
to be presented as noble, that this simple gesture of like, who, somebody, I can imagine idly going back. I mean, I'd go back whether I intended to deliver that letter or not. I mean, it's not some great moment.
No, but it could, but it should be, and this is the point. Like I'm trying to think of examples of this, but we've seen this in films before. There'll be a character that's, like you say, trapped in a situation they don't want to be in. Often they'll go to like a small town and get mistaken for something, and then they end up. I'm even sure there's westerns that have done it, and there'll be the moment where they try and sneak out of town, and they have that moment of conscience.
Looks like the
Like
man with no name, right?
yes, but like
Except he's swarmy, yeah.
yeah. But like, yeah, I mean, there is that kind of, especially in the first one, especially like, yeah, Fistful of Dollars, there's that kind of like, he's been playing both sides just to get the money and then realizes he sort of has an obligation. But there's more than that. There are scenes where you'll have characters that sort of like drive out of town or whatever, and then they slam on the brakes and they're just sort of like, they get angry with themselves because they're like, shit, I know I'm going to go back. Like something has happened, and I now feel responsible in this town. I know I have an obligation. I mean, it's a trope. Is a scene
Yeah.
where the character that was smarmy and a con artist becomes a part of that town, and then all of a sudden,
Yeah.
in trying to escape, then decides that they get the opportunity to escape. They can have a clean getaway, but then they stop themselves at like the town limit or something. You know, they'll have the sort of like, you're now leaving, you know, Pine View, whatever, and they'll
Mhm.
stop and they're like shit, and then they'll have to turn around and they go back and they'll face their, you know, the sort of the confrontation sort of happens. Um, so it's just that this is the moment where like this scene should exist. This film should this scene should exist, but it should be him belting past, and it's the way it's shot that's the problem, not the
Yeah.
moment, because the moment, so the way it's shot is the boy holding the letter up for like what, an hour, maybe more. It feels like forever. And the boy starts crying because he feels like he's been passed, and it's even worse because of the end of the film, which I'll talk about in a sec. I'll mention in a
Yes.
second. But then he stops, and like you say, it pauses and it's in slow mo, and then you have him turn around, and he comes back and he leans down in the saddle and grabs the letter out the boy's hand, and it's all, the music swells, and oh, isn't he amazing? But this is the moment where it should be, as you say, he should stop, and it should be that moment of conscience, and he should really be like, I could leave. No one knows. I could disappear right now. I could ride on, and no one will ever see me again. And then it should be that realization of like, you should have that, you know, even if you have flashbacks, however clumsily you want to do it, of like that realization that like, no, there's an advantage to doing this. Something makes him go back and grab that letter from the boy, and then that's when it's important because you've seen that change in character. Like this is that, you know, if you had someone like
Well,
Sam Rockwell or someone that could play Smarmy, it would be more important. But in this point, they want to give you a statue. That's what it's about.
yeah. I guess I have a problem with the letter itself as the symbol because all this time things that you're talking about this trope, and first of all, for that trope to work in all of those cases, the character intends on leaving town, right?
Yes.
Um, that's not clear here because the character has no clear arc, and
Mm-mm.
his motivations are not clear in any specific scene. But I have a problem with the letter because again, like, I mean, if you're in a postman's uniform and you are pretending to be a postman, you would also pick up the letter.
Yeah.
Like, just picking up a letter that's held out for you does not obligate you to be a postman and fulfill everyone's heroic desires, right? Like, if you're leaving town and you decide to go back because you're realizing they're all about to be massacred, I clearly understand the stakes. I don't
Mm.
understand the stakes of picking up a letter that's held out for you. You see what I'm saying? Like,
Mm.
I know what it's supposed to symbolize, but it doesn't symbolize that.
No, it doesn't work in that. Yeah, you're right about the letter. I mean, it's the point because it's the post, so it kind of has to be. But yes, but um, I'm thinking about other versions. I've just been sort of googling, so I really wanted to sort of think about other versions of this
Hmm.
trope. And this way it works in comedy because you can do this a bit better sometimes with these characters.
Hmm.
And there is a kind of like thing of like Galaxy Quest is a really good example that film I adore. And also I think of like, if you're going to do Western, The Three Amigos.
Yep.
Again, like actors that go into sort of thing is they think it's something. They think. I mean, I'm not saying that the
I
Postman.
love that you basically pointed out this movie is the Three Amigos done as a drama.
Yeah, pretty much. It is, isn't it? Really.
Yeah,
Um,
that's kind of true.
but yeah, but they have that moment where they're able to
We're
escape.
here to do Shakespeare. To
Yeah.
be or not to be. That's the question. That's I mean, the most insipid version of a Shakespeare performance you've ever seen. It is the
Yeah,
Three Amigos.
yeah. Um, yeah. Kevin Costner read The Postman, watched The Three Amigos, and then made this film. Um, but both of those have that moment where that sort of like that character, like the Three Amigos being Steve Martin, Chevy Chase, and Martin Short, or Tim Allen's character in Galaxy Quest, where they're like, no, we've now got to do something about this, and because they start off being either idiots or smarmy. Like it's got to have that moment of it's got to be a point of like, oh, I've moved from being the fraud to being the truth. Like that transition has to take place, and I don't feel it happens in this film in a legitimate way. But this moment with the letter should be it. It should be a kind of like not quite a fist pumping me, but it should have more impact. I mean, Kevin
Yeah.
Costner clearly
It should have
wants.
an emotional
Yeah, I mean,
impact.
Kevin Costner
It,
clearly thinks it does, but
no, and it doesn't. It fails so utterly
Mhm.
and is so embarrassing. That I don't blame people for hating this movie because of moments like that.
Mhm.
And I don't hate this movie, but that is possibly the worst moment in the entire movie. And it's a moment when it's trying to be, and I hate that I hate this, but it's the moment where it's trying to be legitimate, where it's
Mm.
trying to say something, where it's trying to wear its heart on its sleeve. Um, and I mean, I like this movie is about hope. I like the things this movie is trying to say, but you know, it's like it doesn't understand the social situation. It's like it doesn't understand that it hasn't sold this transition, it hasn't sold this moment at all. And that it's doing and that it's shooting the moment in the most cliched, like you'd be laughed out of film school for, this sequence.
Yes, it's that thing. I love that kind of like it is the sequence that when it happens, um, like uh, in my review of this film, I say it's saccharine. Like there's a real sort of like over emotionality to things, which is fine in some places. Like I'm fine with that kind of melodrama and stuff like that. But this scene is so over the top. Like it's almost like 2 degrees away from parody. Like if there was a Hot Shots
Yeah.
Part 3, like this would be in it. This is the thing of like Kevin Costner of um what was his name? Yeah, the actor who did the Hot Shots films. But like I can imagine him having this scenario and doing this, and them doing this sort of thing of him grabbing the letter and being like, "This." I mean, this is 2 degrees away from parody. That's how bad this scene is. And yeah, it's. But I get the point. I understand what they're trying to do. But it's even if I'm sat there going like, yeah, but I've seen this done elsewhere better, and like this is
Well, to your point, it's like Han Solo deciding to stay for Princess Leia.
yes,
It's I think even in Road Warrior, Mad Max is leaving, there's a very similar, when he decides to stay, and he sort of runs into conflict
mm-hmm.
there. So, but yeah, and Tropic Thunder is
Mm.
another comedic example, right? Um, yeah, so I mean, there are lots of examples of this, but you're right. I mean, this does come off as sort of like you could change the music slightly, and this would be, a parody.
Yeah, and that's not good. That's not a good place
No.
to be. Um, but the thing is, I came in and I want to because we sort of got two things I want to sort of talk about before we come to the end. I came in and I told you like I don't want to be just shitting on this film because it is kind of weird how I did enjoy this film in that same way that I enjoyed sort of Waterworld. I actually think is weirdly like a worse film than this. I still enjoy Waterworld, but like there's kind of parts in that are sort of even because it goes so silly, and I think some of the bits in it I'm like, okay, that's kind of a bit daft. Um, I think I was just in the mood for the melodrama of this. That like like you say, when this film works and when there are scenes that work, like I really kind of enjoy it, and it sort of allows me to sort of bypass some of the crap, and there's a lot of crap. Like don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm not lauding this up as like it should have won an Oscar, not by any shot, but yeah, I don't know. It's just an interesting it's an interesting mess, is what it is. It's a really interesting mess that I kind of enjoyed, and it didn't feel like I didn't feel the length as well, like the 3 hours. It's long, but
Yeah.
I was able to
I feel the
enjoy.
length.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I stopped this movie several times through and took breaks. At one point I took a nap. and rewound it and
We,
resumed it.
I was gonna say,
Yeah,
was that like yeah, intentionally, or did the film sort of like just put you to
yeah.
sleep?
I found myself drifting off and thought, oh, I'll come back to it.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, there are some shots with that really drag. Um, I mean, there's stuff that I like. Um, but to resume with the plot, like, when he just before the climax, when he disbands the postal service, I don't understand why he does it. I
yeah,
know why he's supposed to do it. He's
yes,
supposed to do it because he cares about them and doesn't want them all to die. But then he also lets Ford Lincoln Mercury go kill himself. He knows he's going to his death and says, "Oh, he's a better man," which is a good line. I like that
hmm
line. I like that shot. It's an
that's
upward
that bit.
shot
Well,
of,
that no, go on. Sorry, yeah,
yeah, of Ford. I mean, I think, and I like that, oh, okay, that black character is now the moral center of the movie. There's a lot that I like about that moment, but I don't understand why he's disbanding the postal service in the first place.
that moment. So there's a moment where, like, like he's had people burn the uniform. He's trying to dismantle the postal service because he knows that like people are getting attacked on their routes by Bethlehem's army. But you're right, like it doesn't make a whole heap of sense because we've already had it established that this thing is expanded. So even by sort of dismantling these people, others are still going to be doing it. So it doesn't kind of work.
And Bethlehem's coming for vengeance anyway.
Yeah,
Like,
it doesn't stop
burn your
anything.
uniforms. He's going to massacre people no matter what. If anything, he's going to be more confused by,
Mm,
saying, "Well, you're hiding in the population. I'm going to kill everybody." I mean,
yeah.
I don't know.
No, you're right. It doesn't work totally. But I do like this moment. So there's been a guy that's been sort of planted by Bethlehem into the postal service, and he finally sort of reveals himself, and he tries to shoot um the postman, but can't. But I do like that, and this is one of the scenes I really liked when he does sort of talk to him and he says like, we've shown you there's something better. Like you could have done this at any point and you didn't, and
Mhm.
you see you've actually sort of like I'm kind of questioning why you're doing it now. And then he sort of says, well, you've inspired this and da da da, and he says, I'm not that man. There's a true man, or there's a real man, and you see sort of Ford Lincoln sort of, and I thought that was really cool. I did really like that scene, and again, like I say, overly a bit melodramatic, but it works and it works well.
I agree.
Um, and that's the thing,
It
like say,
sells it.
it really does
That's a moment where the direction works.
exactly,
Yeah,
and that's what. So that when you have the sort of the idiot scene with the letter and the slow mo horse turning and stuff, and then you have this other scene when you do go like, so you can do it. That you can't you understood that scene and you got it, but you really missed that scene. Oh, but the point of this other scene that you got is intentionally making both you and Ford Lincoln look like heroes. So you get that because that's what you want. I think that's the
right.
difference. But it works. It's a good scene. Um, so I do like that. But also it sets up the end as well, where the changing of winning of the hearts and minds. This is what I want to get to is the end of the film. That's the bit I really want to get to, is this kind of final confrontation where
Can we just briefly touch on this whole sojourn into the wilderness with the girl where, we meet what's his name? The pop singer,
Tom Petty.
and
Yeah.
we see Tom Petty of
Yeah.
all, of all casting decisions, clearly you just get the sense that the director likes Tom Petty.
He's like
Uh, you
fourth
know,
build. He's like on the credits. He's like fourth.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's so bizarre. And then there's this like contraption that lets you fly over the lake, and it's suddenly like Tom Petty is the closest you have to Waterworld,
Yeah.
right? In terms of like playing camp. Suddenly we're in a different kind of movie. He builds a whole additional army. He's got it like this movie that is so slow, that is
Mm.
3 hours long. It's so slow. He builds an entire army in the space of like apparently a couple weeks, and he's just, if that all happens off camera as he's told to go convince these three towns, and suddenly you see the three towns in postal uniforms. Where did they make these uniforms from? I mean, this is so bizarre to me.
The moment I like about this that is because one of the things is because this has all been quite grounded. It's a western, so there's been very little need for special effects. It's not Waterworld, so different thing. That moment where he takes that thing and it's sort of this sort of cable car thing down and shoots down, and he's flying across this dam and across this sort of body of water, and he looks across and there's these four people like galloping along the sort of road in their postal uniforms and stuff, and it cuts back to him, back to Kevin Costner on this contraption, and it's some of the worst rear projection green screen I've ever seen. Like it's hilariously bad. Again, like 2 degrees from sort of like parody when you're like, oh, they did not think about this. They were just sort of like, oh, we'll just like it's only like a 2 minute scene. We'll just do it. It looks so bad. It took me out of the film for a second. I was just like, oh my God, that's not good.
And why include all this footage of him sliding down that contraption and not at least like a 30-second montage of him visiting those cities and convincing people, hey, you don't believe it, but I led an army, and there's this bad guy who's not threatening you, but you can be part of a reconstructed America if you just join this postal service and go attack this guy who's not attacking you. I don't know. I
Can we
find this such a baffling choice.
Can I just say all this stuff we're talking about of this going off and convincing other settlements, and the moments of self doubt, and but then regrouping, sort of like the fails and all this other stuff. All of this happens in The Walking Dead.
Mm.
Like it clearly takes this story and was like, yeah, we're going to do this, but better and with zombies. So I just find it's kind of weird. But you're right, all this kind of thing is they almost run out of time and money, and they're like, and they're so like, we're going to do it this way. But he does raise the. I mean, again, one of the things this kind of made me think about, but is done better elsewhere, and it sort of gets the emotional pump. Is do you remember the about 92, 93, maybe a bit earlier? Three Musketeers, the Disney's Three Musketeers, Keith Sutherland, Oliver Platt,
Vaguely.
Charlie Sheen, yeah, who was also did Hot Shots. There's a moment in that, obviously, it's obviously the Three Musketeers story. And in that, there's a moment when sort of like, they call out to the other musketeers that have been retired by Richelieu. And they have this thing where the sort of you see the musketeers sort of riding through the French countryside, and they'll throw like daggers into walls, and it's got like you're called to duty and all this other stuff. And then people will sort of pull up floorboards, and the tunic is there or the sword is there and all this other stuff, and people are coming to action. And it's really cool. It's a great little montage. That's how you say what you want to see here is this thing of like the word has spread and now you've been called to action by the postman. But like you say, it doesn't kind of happen. It just sort of edits it all out. It's kind of like he's going to do these things and he's successful. We assume he's successful because it happens. So you're right. It's a really weird choice. But again, I think it's Kevin Costner's choice. I think this is his thing of he wants to go for the melodrama. He wants to go for this sort of like this mythological. By this point, he's kind of bored by the details and just wants to go for this sort of legend telling. The connective tissue no longer matters.
Yeah, I agree. And he's not interested in a montage of convincing people, right?
Mm-mm.
I mean, we've had enough of that. And I have the same feeling of sort of like barreling to the conclusion, but it does kind of highlight this timeline problem for me.
Mm-hmm.
That it's like, not only is he the Messiah who's, able to just convince people off screen. I mean, to me, it defeats the entire purpose of the movie to say that he's inspiring and he's built up this movement that's going to reconstruct America, to say, right, he can visit 3 strange towns and magically convince them, like the Pied Piper, to, go
Jump
into
to.
combat.
Yeah.
I just find it's just such a mind-boggling omission. And it's funny that I've never seen this movie all the way through. And I've seen the conclusion several times, just from it being played on TV or whatever. And I've always thought, well, that looks kind of interesting. That doesn't look as bad as I've been led to believe.
Mm.
And one of the reasons why it doesn't seem as bad is because I've missed this
The
scene
rest of it.
here.
Yeah.
Right. So like I've skipped ahead and I've just thought, oh, there's stuff that I'm missing, right? But actually I'm not missing anything because the movie just skips ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. No. It just sort of it just sort of decides that it's not that it's unimportant. It's just sort of like, well, we've got to get to the end now because we've wasted time on so many other things. Um, it would not surprise me in the slightest, having seen the runtime of other films that Kevin Costner is now responsible for, including Horizon, which I've not watched, and I don't think I will be. Like, it would not surprise me if it was in the script and someone was just like, "We're not shooting that. It's pointless. It's costing us money. It's time we don't need. Jump it." Like it feels a bit like that's the point where they were like, "We don't need these things." Um,
So we finally get to the conclusion of, the two armies face each other, and Kevin Costner, sees that Ford Lincoln Mercury is prisoner, and Negan has, decided to play on his emotional defenses and use every asset in a Machiavellian way. And so Kevin Costner rides over, invokes the right to challenge, tears his uniform, which tears right in the right place, perfectly to reveal the
yeah.
hate that's been seared into him, which is another scene that I don't think they show. I don't even, you know, think it's clear that he got the branding until earlier when it's revealed by the
Hmm.
woman. Um, but anyway, then they have a fight and everything is resolved except the guy who has lost his balls and his tongue,
Yeah.
you know, gets his symbolic poetic revenge. And I sort of hate this. I sort of hate when the villain is left alive and then conveniently, the hero doesn't have to do the job of killing them
Hmm.
and somebody else just shows up and kills them after that decision so the hero's hands can be clean. I understand what it's doing here, that like his sins have caught up with him and that character who we set up earlier, you
Yeah.
know, gets his revenge. But it's I still kind of hate it.
I, no, I agree. I've always hated this thing of sort of like, there's the fight back and forth, and whatever happens, and then like you say, the postman gets on top and he's strangling him. It's sort of like, no, no more killing. And you're like, no, 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 one more killing. That's what this needs. Like just one more, you're fine. This guy needs to be done. Um, yeah, I've always hated these things of, and again, this goes to the white bread sort of like boring nature of this hero that they don't want to tarnish him. He has to be sort of like somebody else. Like even Ford Mercury's like Ford Lincoln Mercury is more willing to kill than the postman. And he's like, no, I'm the moral superior. Like no more killing. But we have to kill the villain, so somebody has to do it. So yeah, it kind of bothers me too. I've always been bothered by this kind of sidestepping of responsibility.
Yeah, and it's such a cliche.
Hmm.
Um, but your point about Ford Lincoln Mercury there might be the underlying point that sort of Kevin Costner has to retain his messianic high ground,
Hmm.
having yielded it previously to Ford. So now Ford has to be shown as corrupted in some way compared to him. Um, so yeah, I mean, this is not a very satisfying conclusion. The the villain is at this point at his most confused.
Yeah.
We don't really know what, you know, is going on here. Um, yeah. Okay. I mean, it's cut to years later.
Right. So yeah, we do it. It's all resolved. He goes home. We should highlight as well before this, he actually goes back. He goes back to Abby. She's had the baby, and he is now going to be the father. And we now realize that he is the father that's been spoken about. We already knew from the beginning. Like this was always inevitable. But then it jumps forward to like everything's fine, and a young woman, she's in her what, late 20s maybe, is giving this speech of, we basically sort of got America back because of the postal service, and my father was this heroic sort of, American icon, and in his passing, we're now unveiling this statue, and it's all these people wearing suits, but modern looking suits, because in the future no one has collars. And it's revealed, and it's him grabbing the letter from the boy. Nobody else was there to see it, by the way.
God, I know.
So
I
it's
mean,
not
it's
like,
first of all, it's a callback to like the worst,
yeah.
most unprofessional part of the entire movie.
But then there happens to
Secondly,
be the
why nobody saw it,
no,
and also this is an inconsequential moment. I mean, it might have been consequential to the movie,
yeah.
to the audience watching the movie, but nobody else knows about it except possibly that boy, but that boy would never assume this was an important. Who chose to depict this on the statue?
I don't know. Like,
But
because the
then
boy,
that boy's in the audience,
yeah,
and
and
he
he's like,
says,
it's me.
that was me.
Yeah,
Just to let you know. How does he know that?
yeah.
How does he know that was the time he picked up my letter? I was that boy. I'm so confused by this.
I hate this scene. I hate it for so many reasons. Because I mean, it's such a stupid thing to end on. But also, I have this kind of real problem with um jumping forward in time and then having this kind of like, a utopian version of this. It's like there are boats in the background, everyone's clean and wearing sort of well-tailored sort of clothing, and also everything's back to normal. This is what we said about sort of with like Star Wars and other things. You go like, oh, you've won the rebellion, fantastic. So, how do you now restructure the government and make sure everything's okay? So basically, the story is that this one regional warlord was taken out by a postman. Cool. What, and 20 years later or 30 years later, like, okay, cool. How has that helped with the rest of America? Like, there are lots of other guns and nutters out there. Surely this wasn't the only scenario. We still don't know what the Civil War was about. Surely those tensions are still about. What's going on? I don't understand. This is rubbish. I hate everything about it. It's not just the statue's stupid. The confession of like, I'm the boy
It's
is idiotic.
mind-bendingly dumb.
It's horrible. It just sort of it's one of these things a bit like we go. This raises more questions than It just you didn't need this scene. You could have just ended with the narration and it just be done, and that's it. You do not need this scene.
Yeah, this is the kind of scene that I would imagine if like this whole movie had been like a fantasy of like Charlie from It's Always Sunny.
mhm.
And this is like the concluding scene where all the rest of the gang would say, like, that makes no sense.
Yeah.
Like, what is going on here?
Have
I'm
you ever?
reminded of the end of Mars Attacks,
Yeah.
that kind of does this scene,
Yeah.
except everything's still in rubble and nobody has anything inspiring to say. Um,
Two
which
degrees
really
away.
would be better than this.
2 degrees away from parody. I'm telling you,
Yes.
this is the thing. It's the problem with this film. There are so many good moments in this film and things I enjoy, but then there was other moments that like are so melodramatic and so silly that you are like, this is James Cameron had this problem. So after sort of if you've ever seen the alternate ending to Terminator 2, there's a scene that was filmed of an old Sarah Connor with her grandchildren. And it's this faux sort of like future where there's sort of like this clean Los Angeles and everyone's happy. And then Sarah Connor sat on this bench and obviously Skynet didn't happen and blah, blah, blah. Right. And they filmed it. And then they were like James Cameron was like, this is awful. This is the stupidest thing I've ever done. I don't like this. It makes no sense. It doesn't fit like the rest of the film. It doesn't fit anything. Scrap it. It becomes a deleted scene on a bonus DVD on a DVD at some point. But he like is legit said how much he hated that. It was kind of like a studio mandated thing of like, he did it and they were like, look, it's stupid, get rid of it. If you ever watch it, it's the same kind of thing where you watch that and you're like, yeah, this makes no sense. This doesn't fit the film. It doesn't fit what you wanted to do. Why is it all of a sudden that just because Skynet didn't happen is because we've now got a utopia? Like, this is
Yes.
nonsense.
Is she staring at a statue of the T-800 with
Yeah.
giving the thumbs up,
Yeah.
and you're like, why did you choose to depict
Yeah.
that?
Luckily not. It's not that bad, but it's not far off. And so I hate these kind of like faux, resolutions to get tacked onto the end because it just feels so ridiculous.
Well,
I
you said
hate.
the right word, which is saccharine.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, everything's fine. Somehow this was the moment that history pivoted. And, it seems, as somebody who loves history and loves, and I know you do too, loves these uh, complex ideas
Hmm.
about how history moves and how, even if you believe in the great man theory of history, how all of those characters were gray, were complex, were trapped in their time. I mean, but the first thing that happens is like, 30 years later, everybody says, well, he was a right asshole,
Yeah,
Maybe we
yeah.
shouldn't worship him. Maybe he was a jerk. Maybe um and then other people say that's terrible. And there were other figures that they say, well, why are you praising him instead of, these other figures who deserve more attention and aren't getting it? And that's part of the normal process of, historiography.
Mm.
None of that understanding is here because again, it's, you know, the worshipful Messiah story.
But again, like what's hilarious is this film came in '97, and we've been talking about Mad Max, and again, you talk about the end of this film, like Beyond Thunderdome undermines this film because of this exact point where like Max is kind of heroic, but not. Like you get that he's a jerk and he's is it immoral? Even when he does try and save the kids, like he's constantly saying, like, I'm not this Captain Walker. Like the world is a mess. Stay here. Do not go looking for things. Like, you're being ridiculous. But even the end of that film has a similar sign of post finale, because you've been having again the narration. It jumps forward in time, and you have one of the characters again reciting the legend of Max, but as Captain Walker. But it's not like Sydney's not been restored. Like, it's they are still living in the ruins of these old places, but they're now like,
Yeah.
oh, but we've learned that, like, we will accept and we will, welcome people into our tribe to help. We are on that journey to rebuild, but we're not there by a long shot. And that's
And the
sort
point
of
there is the folklore, right? I mean, the point
mm-hmm.
there is the legend itself and how legends form and how history works. It's the point isn't Max is a great guy and you need to be him and want to have his baby,
Yes.
which
Yeah.
seems to be the point here. You mentioned like a degree away from parody. I can't stop thinking about like imagine a movie where somebody like reads a personal letter and decides, I've got to be a better man. And it's a private moment. And then at the end of the movie, you have a statue of him reading that letter, which is like, that's a cinematic moment. That's not a moment anyone would remember that way, except for you and the audience. It seems that there's except it would be better because then, there'd be the kid who says, I wrote that letter,
Yeah.
Um, and it seems to me there's a critical misunderstanding here of like the difference between what your experience is as an audience member and
Mhm.
what a somebody in this universe would feel. And this is a movie that does not understand that difference and is totally focused on what you are experiencing in the audience and what it thinks you're experiencing, and does not seem to know what anyone would actually experience or feel in universe.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair point. I think that's very true. I think, yeah, no, in order to understand as a person looking at that statue at the end of this film, you have to have watched the film. It's
Mhm.
really meta. You have to have watched the film The Postman to understand what statue you're looking at.
The Postman is the movie that was made to celebrate him. And the statue was then made to commemorate the scene from the movie
Yes,
about the Postman.
I love that. That's how sort of like, yeah, how meta this was really going about folklore and storytelling. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've kind of sort of dug into it and sort of torn it to pieces because it is stupid. I mean, this is the thing. I put it on Letterbox. I said this film is self-indulgent, it's saccharine, and it's dumb, but I kind of like it. And that's how I feel. That's just it. Like this film is dumb. Like, this film does not know how to, it's got really wonky casting. It really doesn't know what message it wants to tell. Kevin Costner like does not want to sully his character at any point. And so you end up with, it doesn't kind of understand the nature of the book. I kind of want to read the book now to see if that is a better representation of this idea. It doesn't understand this idea of folklore or the idea of sort of like hope being spread but through storytelling. Like it really doesn't kind of get what it wants to be, but it's still kind of fun. It would be better as a TV series. I can imagine this being a really interesting kind of, show, like a mini series.
I agree. This movie sort of like I agree with everything you've just said. There's a lot that I like here. I like the ideas. There are some great scenes. There are some great shots. The next shot will inevitably one that I'm confused by with the choices. Uh, you said about Kevin Costner not wanting to depict himself, in a negative way. This is sort of like if Bruce Willis of 2005 made The Last Boy Scout.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, yeah, he's drunk, but he's, like that's minimized, and he does
Yeah.
something heroic to make it seem like he's not that down and out. And then he learns a lesson. But wait a minute, wasn't he just heroic kind of when he was drunk too? And I mean, I'm talking about like the Bruce Willis who can jump on the back of a helicopter and
Oh, well,
doesn't want to do anything wrong.
I was gonna say you're talking about the fifth Die Hard film, and basically where you're like, oh, this franchise started with like a regular guy that was a bit of a schlub, is now falling 3 stories through like glass plates and into a and walking away from Chernobyl without any after effects. Like, yeah, no, like it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, so I agree with everything you're saying, but I do kind of like I'm not as charmed by the over the top aspects of this. I think I'm more charmed by the history aspects of it, the
Mm.
folklore aspects of it, and the postal service, and but even then there are like in the fight, God, that we haven't even mentioned how in the final battle the villain has won. And what inspires Kevin Costner is the villain's speech as he's about to kill Kevin Costner. And, he says, I'm more vicious, I have something to fight for, which doesn't make any sense because it's not clear what he's been fighting for, but Kevin Costner has had something he's
Hmm.
fought for at this point. And then Kevin Costner says, uh, the United States, you know, what patriotic jargon is this?
I
Like,
thought, yeah, I was kind of both convinced. I was both sort of relieved and disappointed by that line because when he says like, "What do you believe in?" It's obviously the restored United States. That's what they're sort of after. He says, "I believe in the United States," which is a nebulous kind of idea. I'm just kind of glad he didn't say the United States Postal Service.
no, I think that would be better. See,
Yeah.
I think that would at least make sense. Like, it would not be good,
Hmm.
but like we've seen he doesn't intervene when a flag is burned. He hasn't once talked about the United States. At least the United States Postal Service is something he's come to believe in. It still would be cringeworthy and bad, but at least it wouldn't be like out of left field. It's like, when did you become a patriot?
Hmm.
Like, I mean, I guess he liked that Vietnam vet, but outside of that's the closest thing we've had to any kind of
Patriotism.
patriotic concern
Yeah.
out of him. It is the most mind-boggling, and then you have the Marvel moment of like, all hope is lost, but I got renewed vigor from citing my, inspiration. Yeah, that I mean, that is well, such a terrible line. But again, the movie's not about the United States.
No,
The movie's not about patriotism.
no. Well, at least it hasn't been up until this point. Now
So
it
so
is.
yeah, so all the stuff, but I do like this movie too in a way. I mean, I like the history stuff. I like the sort of con man stuff. I like all
Mm.
that stuff. I like the swarmy stuff. I like the cabin in the woods, and the snow. I like, the more morally complex stuff. I like the idea, even if it's my head canon, that the villain is really building a civilization and isn't that bad. Um, Yeah, this is good enough that like there is a version of this movie that is an amazing movie.
I agree.
This is far from it,
Yeah.
but it's enough to let you know that it could have been
Yes,
that movie.
I agree. It's one of those that's sort of like, yeah, there's a germ of something brilliant in here. Unfortunately, Kevin Costner then directed himself and turned it into something else. That's the crux of the problem, I think, in a lot of this. Okay, right. Yeah, we've gone to time. We're sort of wrapping up. So I think I think we've both given our sort of final thoughts on the Postman. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, let's know what you think. Have you even attempted to take on this 3 hour epic of 90s cinema? Let us know what you think. Are we right? Are we wrong? Is it better than Waterworld, or is Waterworld better? I'm kind of interested to see what people think. I have a feeling that people are going to be more inclined to support Waterworld because it has that camp sort of like Mad Maxy feel to it. We shall see. Anyway, so yeah, but if you want to find out more about what we're doing, in the next episode, we are doing a much more sort of centered film, a film with much more detailed plotting, is Children of Men, starring Clive Owen, and again, based on a book, which I won't have read. But if you want to go, next episode, a couple of weeks, we'll be coming back with that. And on the Patreon, we're doing way more things. We've got all these kinds of different other sort of post-apocalyptic adjacent films we're doing on there. Sort of go check out the listing. We've just done When the Wind Blows. We've got Hell Comes to Frogtown, and a few others
Six
that
String
come up.
Samurai on
Six
the
String
beach,
Samurai.
Oblivion.
Yes, we've got some doozies coming up there as well. So do go check out our Patreon. There's a link down below, and just for $5, you get access to hours and hours of our sort of discussing all different bits and pieces. So go do it. Anyway, for now, Julian, thank you very much for this discussion, and thank you for taking on another Kevin Costner trope. It's been
Thank you, Scott. I did as I started this think, what has Scott forced me to watch? I paid money to rent this movie. I'm like, am I giving money to Kevin Costner for having made this?
But the discussion was worth it. I feel that this
That is
discussion
true.
has made it worthwhile. So at least you have that. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and we shall see you on the next episode.